Hereby call to order the Roseville City Council meeting for Monday, February 27th, 2023. Mr. City Manager, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Etten.
Present.
Councilmember Schroeder.
Here.
Councilmember Groff.
Here.
Councilmember Strawn.
Here.
Mayor Rowe.
Here. And with us at the dais, we have our City Attorney, Rachel Tierney. On my right at the left end of the dais, for those viewing from home, and on the opposite end is our City Manager, Pat Trudgeon. We also have staff, department heads, and others who will be participating in the meeting as agenda items come up and will be introduced at that time. We would ask folks, if you have a cell phone, to make sure and silence it, or otherwise assure that it doesn't disrupt the meeting this evening. And Mr. Trudgeon, do we have anybody participating remotely online, other than presenters?
Let me double check. We just have one person who identified being with the Star Tribune, so I'm not sure if they're here to testify or not, but otherwise it's staff presenting.
Sure. For people who do participate remotely, certainly the way to come into the meeting to participate and speak or comment at agenda items is to let us know by using the raise your hand feature in Zoom. We always want to let people know that. All right, with that then, folks could stand, if you're able, for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next on tonight's agenda is consideration of the agenda for this evening, and as we always do, we'll start with staff. Mr. Trudgeon, is there any change to tonight's agenda from a staff perspective?
No changes, Mr. Mayor.
All right, and then we'll check with the council. Council members, any changes you'd like to request or items to remove from consent for separate consideration? Councilmember Strawn.
I'd like to remove item 10J from the consent for discussion. That is the Partnership with People Incorporated.
Right. All right, is there any other requested changes or items to remove from consent for separate consideration from the council? All right, we'll double check with the audience. Is there anybody here for an item in section 10 of tonight's agenda, which is the consent agenda, items A through J, but now through I? If you are here for that item or one of those items and wish to comment or ask a question, please let us know, and we can pull that item off the consent for separate consideration earlier in the meeting so that you can make your comment or ask your question without having to wait to the end of the meeting. Is there anyone here for an item in section 10 of tonight's agenda? Does not appear to be the case. And Mr. Trudgeon, still just the one participant online?
Correct.
All right, then with that, we have the agenda with item 10J removed from consent for separate consideration earlier in the meeting. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved. Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Schroeder, seconded by Councilmember Strawn to approve the agenda as amended. With that change, any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and we have our agenda for this evening. Next on the agenda is general public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to items that are not on this evening's agenda but may be of interest to people in the city or related to city business. We do always provide an opportunity for members of the public to speak as agenda items come up, but we do also at each meeting want to have that opportunity for people to speak on non-agenda items at the start of the meeting. Once again, if you're participating remotely, you'll want to use the raise your hand feature if you'd like to speak during public comment at this time or any other time. I see we have a member of the public here with us. So once again, the protocol is just start with your name and address or street for the record.
Hey.
Direct your comment or questions to the city council, and then a 3-minute time limit per speaker. Welcome.
Okay, Roger Hess Jr., Wagner Place. So just a few things I'd like you to consider discussing throughout the year. One is I'd like to see a safe exchange zone like many other metro cities have put in, and emergency call boxes at the parks buildings, at least one at the wading pool. If some kid's drowning or something, I'd like to get help there right away. Or if, like last summer when I was there, a big fight came and started, and most people have no clue what address the parks are at. A lot of them don't even know what name of the park is. So unless, when they're calling 911, they don't really know where to tell them where to come to. So at least if you had one at the wading pool, I think it would be really good, rather than a sign telling people to walk up to County Road C and Snelling and use a phone at a gas station. And then your equity statements, when I look at other ones locally, seem to be missing 3 major categories. and I think you should consider adding them gender ID, home language, and physical appearance, because all those I see in other cities and school districts, but I don't see in Roseville's equity statement. And you finished the Pocahontas thing, which is great. Now you should think about Pioneer Park. I mean, the pioneers are the people who took the land from the Native Americans, and you're honoring them. And I'd also like you to start, there's over 50 different cultural backgrounds in Roseville, yet you only seem to honor 3 or 4 throughout the year. You should start honoring some other ones too, rather than just the same ones. And if you want to have a more diverse population involved in the city government, why don't you go to 6 council members so that there be more room and more chance for more diverse people on the council? And then my last thing is, last year, one thing that bothered me about the water rate thing last year is that you didn't really find out about it till later in the year. And it seems like at the beginning of the year, you always estimate how much money is going to be in a fund at the end of the year. So it seems like you must have been missing quite a few hundreds of thousands of dollars at the end of 2021 in the water fund. And I don't know why staff or the outside accountants didn't notice that at the end of 2021. Can like $500,000, $1 million just disappear from a fund and nobody notices it? It just seems very odd to me that nobody would notice you're missing all this money. I mean, could the road fund, all of a sudden be short $2 million and nobody knows? So anyway, thanks for listening, and thank you for allowing people to make public comments. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else here for public comment this evening, general public comment? Great. Seeing no one, no hands raised, Mr. Trudgeon?
There actually is.
Okay.
Let me bring them in. All right.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi, my name's Louis Kress. I'm a reporter at the Star Tribune. It might be too late to discuss it. I was just tuning in last minute, and a colleague was mentioning that there was that item 10J about possibly partnering with People Incorporated. I guess I was just wondering if there was going to be any reason for taking it off the agenda, or if there's any plans for the near future for what will be done with that item.
Oh, that item has not been taken off the agenda. It was just taken out of the consent agenda so that it can be more thoroughly discussed and questions
Oh,
and
okay.
answers. So
Okay.
we'll be
I was
taking
just-
that up shortly here.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Anyone else from the public? Right, and I did want to just very quickly note on the Pioneer Park name, as I understood it, I believe it's in honor of the pioneers of Roseville, more or less, and so I could be wrong on that, but I would certainly we can clarify that as appropriate. With that, then, we'll move to the rest of the agenda. Next on our agenda, we have recognitions and donations. We have 2 items on that section of the agenda this evening. The first is a proclamation related to Women's History Month. And then the second is related to a donation of public art. And so we'll start with the proclamation, and as always, we'll read the proclamation, and then a motion to approve it would be in order. The proclamation reads as follows. Whereas throughout history, extraordinary women have made significant contributions to the growth and strength of our city, state, and nation in countless ways, and whereas through leadership, innovation, and ingenuity, generations of women have made significant contributions in science, medicine, technology, business, politics, entrepreneurship, and culture, and whereas women have been leaders in securing their own rights of suffrage and equal opportunity, and in the abolitionist, emancipation, industrial labor, civil rights, and peace movements, creating a more fair and just society for all, and whereas whether serving in elected positions across America, leading groundbreaking civil rights movements, venturing into unknown frontiers, or programming revolutionary technologies, generations of women that knew their gender was no obstacle to what they could accomplish have long stirred new ideas and opened new doors, having a profound and positive impact on our community. And whereas, despite their contributions, the role of women in history has been consistently overlooked and undervalued in literature, education, science, and culture, and whereas this month we celebrate countless pioneering women and their victories. And we continue to work to build a society where our daughters have the same possibilities as our sons. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City of Roseville declares March 2023 to be Women's History Month in the City of Roseville. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Strawn, seconded by Councilmember Ratten to approve that proclamation. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and that proclamation is approved. Next, once again, is to consider accepting a donation of a public art piece at the Harriet Alexander Nature Center. And I believe our Parks and Rec Director, Matt Johnson, will be introducing this item for us. Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Council. It's always fun when I get to be here for this part of the agenda. As you are all well aware, our Parks and Recreation system has benefited tremendously over the years from significant contribution. Donations, both large and small, have come together to make our very special Parks and Recreation system. Recently, staff was approached by John and Chris Robertson-Smith about making a significant donation through the Friends of Roseville Parks to the Parks and Recreation system, and specifically the grounds at the Harriet Alexander Nature Center. John and Chris are both longtime volunteers who have worked at the Nature Center for a long time. John specifically for a long time coordinated the volunteer staff who managed the public hours of the Nature Center and the volunteers who came in for all of the events that occurred on site. The Robertson-Smiths are specifically interested in contributing a public art piece to the Nature Center that would achieve two goals. One, beautify the site, and two, attract more potential visitors. Early in the process, the Robertson-Smiths were connected with Lori Green, a prominent local public mosaic artist. Ms. Green has created pieces for the Minnesota Parks and Recreation Board, the City of St. Louis Park, the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport, and of course our library here in Roseville. Ms. Green is significant track record in public art and has a long track record of strong work. Prior to entertaining the donation, staff reviewed Ms. Green's resume and met with her about the process. We also consulted with members of Arts Roseville on a one-off basis and other communities where Ms. Green has worked and found that she would be a great fit here in the city. Specifically, Ms. Green, and I'm reading from her biography here, is a multicultural African American, Native American, and Caucasian woman who brings a unique voice and perspective into public art. She prides herself on engaging in the communities within which she works and making sure that historically underrepresented voices are heard in their art pieces. Ms. Green did attend our Parks and Recreation Commission meeting in February to share some very preliminary ideas, and I will emphasize that word preliminary because we really haven't begun the process yet. Specifically, her preliminary, again, emphasizing that word, plan is to install 3 potential cairns at the Nature Center. And if you're like me, you don't know what a cairn is. I didn't. So if we can, Pat, if we can potentially see the computer screen, I put a couple in your packet, but these are some works that Ms. Green has done in other communities that sort of give you an idea of what they are, which are mosaic pieces that are stacked individual art pieces to make a holistic approach. Now, I had to promise her, and this is another mosaic piece she had done in Lake Street in Minneapolis as well. Now, I had to promise her that before I share this last one, I would reemphasize that preliminary idea. But if you're wondering what it might look like at the Nature Center, here's some very early sketches that has much room for evolution of what could go in the Nature Center. So sort of a combination of what you saw with natural themes. The reason I keep emphasizing preliminary is because Ms. Green's process involves the community intentionally and involves a process that evolves as she does the work. So what is here may not be at all what ends up happening. At the conclusion of the commission meeting, the commission did recommend to staff that we move forward with Ms. Green and acceptance of the donation. As you know, the first step to any significant donation is council acceptance. Once the donation is accepted, Ms. Green could be hired and begin the work, at which time a more detailed design and engagement plan would be developed. It is anticipated that the total project will take a little over a year to complete. With that, I will turn it back to you, Mayor Rowe.
All right, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Are there questions from the council in relation to this item? All right. Councilmember Strong?
Not specifically to this item, and maybe this is something for consideration thereafter, but it is mentioned in this proposal that the city of Roseville does not currently have a public arts master plan, and so I think that's something that we should consider speaking on, not specifically about whether or not we accept this, because I think this sounds like a fantastic plan.
Right. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this item this evening? Still no additional folks attending online? All right. Then we'll return to council consideration. What is the desire of the council in relation to accepting the donation and proceeding? Councilmember Groff.
Well, I would move to accept the donation, and I'd like to speak to that one.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Groff, seconded by Councilmember Strawn to accept the donation and initiate the process. Councilmember Groff, as the maker of the motion, speaking to it.
I think it's really excellent that Lori Green was chosen. She did work with Arts Roseville on the project at the library, and her including the community is the best I have seen of any artist as far as reaching out and working. We worked with the schools also and worked with the school system so that we had art students working on that project. The brilliant thing about Lori Green is that she is the artist overarching the whole thing, so there's a unifying force behind it, and that made it just perfect with the students because they could do parts of it, but she was the one who was pulling it all together, and that's why it was successful. And I know she will make something really wonderful for the Nature Center, so I'm very pleased.
Right. And as the seconder, Councilmember Strawn.
I think I agree, and I know that just concerned for making sure that there's ongoing maintenance of the artwork so it maintains its beauty and continues to offer a respectful piece. We wouldn't want it to be destroyed in some way and then not really reflect what we want it to. But I am very excited about this, and I'm excited about what work she's done.
Is there any other discussion on the motion? Councilmember Bradley.
I too, I love this. I think it'll be exciting to see if the turtle's foot's turned slightly to the right. No,
Designed by committee has already begun.
sorry. I think it's great that there's a robust public piece. We saw that at Rice and Larpenteur, and I think this is a great way to connect our community. So thank you for that. And I would agree that looking at a larger picture for how public art works in our city would be a good thing for us to be doing, so, long term.
And Councilmember Schroeder.
I also would like to add that it started with long-term volunteers who are making this donations to start with someone who's been in our community and helping out the community for a long time. So you have that piece, and then, of course, the Friends of the Parks. That's a great organization, to be involved in that so all the pieces come together really nicely, and so I definitely support this, and I'm really excited to see this evolve.
What they all said. With that, we have the motion before us to accept the donation and initiate the process. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. And here we go. Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody, and especially to our donors. Very,
Yes.
very appreciative
Yes,
of that.
absolutely.
All right, with that, then we come to section 6 of our agenda, which is items removed from the consent agenda. We did have the one item 10J removed for separate consideration. And Mr. Trudgeon, would you be introducing that item for us this evening?
Yes. So item 10J approves entering into an agreement with People Incorporated to provide for an embedded mental health outreach worker within the Roseville Police Department. The agreement would be for 2 years, and People Incorporated would pay 50% or about $50,000 each year of the agreement for the embedded outreach position. The city would utilize unspent ARPA dollars to pay for the city portion of $50,000 each year for that position. Chief Scheider is here if you have any particular questions about the arrangement. I think we did try to provide some information prior to the meeting for the council for some additional background, but we're certainly happy to have a conversation about it here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. And Councilmember Strawn, you would ask this to be pulled for separate consideration.
Thank you. The main reason I asked for it to be pulled is really the gravity of the importance of it. This is a big step that often our citizens and constituents don't know about, and I wanted to make sure they get to hear about how this process worked, and then that we had a better understanding on how this would augment the services that are already being provided and what the interaction would be between the various agencies And then long-term, I know now we will have NYFS as well as Ramsey County, as well as this, all great tools, but just want to make sure they're working in tandem and that they're working, how they're fitting together. Thank you.
Right. Chief, thank you for being here this evening and making yourself available to help us understand a little more.
Absolutely. Good evening. So to answer the question about how all of these different social workers would work together, we've got Northeast Youth and Family Services, and that really is for people that maybe don't rise to that crisis level. Maybe it's a family that's going through some challenges. Maybe there's some early warning signs. A lot of those cases will divert to Northeast Youth and Family Services. On the Ramsey County social worker side, we're finding that the embedded social work model is kind of the gold standard, actually going out into the field and doing stabilization service with people that are in active crisis. That's our goal, is to get to that. That's kind of the gold standard. And so as we're moving towards that model, the missing gap is the people that can do the follow-up. And that's what we think People's Inc. would be able to fill that gap. So where the embedded social workers from Ramsey County will be mostly field-based, the caseworkers through People's Inc. would be the follow-up, following up with families maybe in the days or weeks or months leading afterwards to make sure that they don't continue to slip through the cracks. We find a lot of people in crisis, it becomes kind of a revolving door. They get stabilized, but then when they don't have that support afterwards, they can fall right back into crisis. And that's what we're trying to prevent, so that it's not just always the police responding, but we can get people proactively going out in the community. So all of these groups will work together, just at different points in the process and for people that are at different places with their struggles with mental health or addiction.
Sounds good, thank you.
Other questions while we've got the chief here?
Love it.
All right,
No, it's
thank you again. Is there anyone from the public, since we've got this pulled from the consent for separate consideration, anyone from the public have any comment on this item at this time? All right. Seeing none, any hands raised? No? All right. Then we'll close the opportunity for public comment and we'll return to council consideration. We've got the request before us to allow us to enter into the agreement with People's Inc. to pursue this and match the funding.
Motion to approve.
Second.
There's the mayor's call. He's going to have
Moved
to
by,
figure that one
moved
out.
by Councilmember Strawn, seconded by the mayor. No. I'll say Councilmember Schroeder. Seconded. With that, we have the motion before us. Any discussion, Councilmember Schroeder, or Councilmember Strawn?
Thank you, Chief, for providing that. I think really helps just understand how it all fits together. And we are so fortunate to have these tools to help us move toward a different way to respond to people instead of just always not looking at what the person individually needs. So thank you so much.
And Councilmember Schroeder. Is this-
And I would echo that and say also, thank you for finding another piece to this puzzle that we can continue to help people who need the services, and it's not a revolving door for you or for them.
Right, any other discussion on the motion?
Just concur.
And I would note that, that because some of the funding sources are shorter term, including for this, that there will be a discussion and an evaluation at the end of that time prior to needing to look at proceeding further with these positions, all of them, to really make sure that everything is fitting and working properly. And I think that's a good plan as well, so it's important to mention that for the public as well. It doesn't mean that everything goes away at the end of the funding. I think we want to find a way that it works, but it does mean that we have a chance to make sure what is being done is working the best, and if we need to make any changes. So appreciate that aspect as well. With that, we have the motion before us to enter into the agreement with People Incorporated and match the funding. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and that is approved. Now that brings us then to our business items. The first item under business items is to receive a presentation by 9 North Executive Director Jeff Ongstad. And Jeff just joined the organization late last year, and so it's great to have an opportunity to get him in to the council and visit with him about what is going on with 9 North. And so we welcome Mr. Ongstad, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, members of the council. First, my name is Jeff Ongstad. I'm the Executive Director of 9 North, and for those of you that are unfamiliar with us, I'll just give you a quick overview. Roseville is part of a 9-city JPA, and that operates basically two entities. The first entity is the North Suburban Communications Commission. We have 9 members, one for each city, and your member is Mayor Rowe. The Communication Commission does franchise renewal and oversight, making sure the provider, in this case Comcast, lives up to all the terms of its agreement. And the current 10-year franchise is up in 2028, so that process will start in just a few years, actually. We also handle cable complaints from subscribers, and while we don't oversee the internet, we can usually resolve most Comcast internet issues also if people call in with issues on that. The commission is funded by a portion of each city's franchise fees, and that's where the funding for the commission comes from. The second entity is the North Suburban Access Corporation. It has all the same members of as the commission, but we produce local programming, including programming, meetings like this, and shorter videos. We also distribute those videos on air as well as social media and online. We do business as 9 North, that's the logo, and the corporation is funded by PEG fees and earned income that we get from doing video production and that sort of thing and streaming. Specifically speaking of our relationship with Roseville, our studios are located, for those of you who don't know, in Roseville on Arthur Street, very close to Walmart, for context. We produce over 1,000 hours of original programming each year, with around 260 hours being Roseville focused. In 2022, we produced 93 Roseville city council meetings, parks meetings, planning meetings. We also cover major Roseville events such as the Rose Parade and Rose Fest. We produce candidate forums for Roseville mayor and council races, as well as appropriate state house and Senate races. We also offer candidate speakouts where candidates can come in and record a message for the viewers. We also partner with Roseville High School and other area high schools to air their sports and concerts. One thing that is coming up real soon is we do facility assessments to your chambers and offer upgrade suggestions each year. We don't anticipate really very many for Roseville this year, as you're pretty up to date, so we shouldn't have really any major updates here. We also have 2 large projects that we're working on for 2023. Our first is upgrading Roseville's government channel, Channel 16, to HD. Our franchise agreement allows for the request to be done after 60 months, which was in January, and we made the request to Comcast, which they've approved, and we're in the process. It's about a 90-day process to get everything up and running. The programming is already produced here in HD. Everything comes to us in HD from your facility, and all the stuff we produce is in HD, and then we currently down convert that to standard definition. So basically, the only thing we're going to have to do is quit down converting it. So the cost will be minimal, if anything at all. And like I said, we hope to get that done probably by the 1st of May, around that area is what we're looking at. But the channel will be much more accessible than now because it'll be up in the HD spectrum where most people spend most of their time. We anticipate the channel being probably 798, which would be right with our sports channel and then right next to like PBS and that stuff in the broadcast channels, which is a very good place to be. We also have one of our main objectives for 2023 is to more than double our community coverage. Due to some recent retirements and some openings we've had, we've been able to retool our staff a little to allow for a lot more production of community events, things in the cities, things in Roseville, things in all of the areas. And we're hoping on telling more stories of the people in Roseville and the stories about things happening here. So we hope to at least double it, perhaps even more than that in the next coming year. In conclusion, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight and to continue to be a partner and a resource for you in the future. And if you have any questions that I can answer, that'd be great.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for being here this evening, and certainly appreciate you coming on board with 9 North and hitting the ground running.
Glad to be here.
Yes, absolutely. And just for the public, I did want to note a couple of things related to the funding. Because there are a couple of acronyms in there, and not everybody's all up to speed on that. But essentially, the funding comes through people's cable bills, through Comcast is the franchisee that has the contract with the 9 cities to be the cable provider. We did at one time have a brief franchise with CenturyLink, or whatever they were doing business as, a few years ago, but that business model changed and that franchise went away. But basically, anybody who wants to provide cable services in the city using the public rights of way by law has to have a franchise with the city, and the revenue from that franchise, which is the fees that you see on your cable bill, part of it is what's known as a franchise fee. And that is about 3%, I think, of the roughly.
Yeah, it's like 5.
And that goes to the cities directly, which is somewhat unique in our 9-city consortium. And so we get that funds directly to Roseville, and then a portion of that, something like a quarter or 30% somewhere, is then paid by the cities back under contract to 9 North to do the work of regulating the franchise and answering cable complaints and things like that. Then the other piece of it is what's known as public education and government, or PEG fees, as was referenced in the presentation, and that's about a 5% figure, and that goes directly to 9 North as an organization, and that's used then for that production of all the various things. And so that maybe helps the folks in the public understand the process a little more, and the existence of that funding comes from, once again, the city's ability to regulate and require a franchise for people to use our public rights of way for their business, essentially providing cable services. So just wanted to add that little bit to the mix. And then certainly if there's any questions or comments that council members have or want to know more about, feel free, this is that chance. Councilmember Strong.
So I was just wondering, is cable required to have access to channel 16 or 798?
In regards.
Does someone have to have a cable subscription in order to access?
They're also streamed online.
Okay, so,
They have that advantage too if somebody wanted to watch them.
okay, so like on
Yeah.
YouTube or something, or some other,
Yeah, through our website or through.
okay, okay. And then about how much of viewership is through cable at this point? Just wondering what the long-term prognosis is on cable if this is
Yeah.
a,
But we don't really get ratings or anything, so it's hard to tell exactly how many people are watching at any one time. We get viewership, obviously, on our social media and that sort of stuff that is counted. But as far as the cable, like, we don't get Nielsen ratings or anything like that. It's not a number that is.
I just know a number of years ago, it was possible to get just the public access channels.
Yeah.
And I know that does not exist anymore, so, as hopefully people who can't afford cable or are not interested are able to be aware of the.
Yeah, they're available online, yeah, if you want to watch them, and mostly all the stories, all the meetings. Well, what happens now is everything is available online also for, like, on demand, for lack of a better term, when people want to watch it also.
Okay,
So mostly all the programming and mostly everything we produce is available online, on YouTube, through Facebook.
gotcha. And how would somebody who advertises for you, is that up to us to advertise that you exist?
We promote it through different mediums, like I said, mostly in social media. I mean, we don't have a huge advertising budget to go out advertising otherwhere. We try to make everybody as aware as possible that we can, but yeah, it's helpful if the cities promote us and where the meetings are, where the videos are, and that sort of thing too.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Other questions or comments, Councilmembers Etten?
Plural now. Thanks
I
for
almost
being
called you
here.
Councilmember Schroeder. Apparently, everybody's going to be called Councilmember Schroeder tonight.
There are worse
Makes
things,
it
right?
easier for you.
Yeah, the worst things.
Worst
yeah.
names?
I had an opportunity to speak very briefly with Mr. Ongstead before, and teaching as a choir director in the Moundsview schools, they provided a great service for that, and that's certainly something that touches parts of Roseville. We have residents that are in those concerts too, and so I appreciate kind of how this, the cities are a big piece of this, but then the school districts and a lot of families find that to be very helpful, so I appreciate that. That service for our community. As we look at various tools for people to access, have you looked at YouTube Live as an option for city council meetings? Is a different place to put, obviously this is running live on the channels, but it's a different way to have that available for people.
Yeah, we actually do that with a couple of our contracted cities that we do meetings for outside of the core cities. They are available, or they actually stream their meetings on YouTube Live, so that's an option if a city wants to do that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Grau.
I think this service is extremely important, especially since we don't have our local newspaper as we lost it a few years ago, so this is more important than ever. And I like the expansion that you're talking about in 2023, so appreciate
Yeah, we
the work.
definitely want to get more stories of people about, more stories of the citizens, more stories of organizations and that kind of thing.
Well, and it gives people access to local information
Absolutely.
that's kind of lacking in the major media sources.
Councilmember Schroeder.
To follow up on that, how are you going to choose which events to add?
A wide variety of ways. I mean, basically, we just want everybody to be looking for that and contact us if they have something that they would like to do a story of. From there, we'll look at it depending on the scalability, I guess, the interest in a larger group of people, whether that is. But right now, we don't necessarily see that as too much of an issue because we'd like to do as much as we can with as much, different people throughout the city as possible. So if anybody has any ideas or anybody, has an organization, just have them contact us, because we're just gearing up right now. Right now, we're just getting the process of hiring another person and that sort of thing. So we hope to be by mid-May full staff, and then we can start hitting this pretty hard, expanding the number of things we do.
Okay,
So yeah, we're looking for ideas everywhere.
thank
So
you.
it's community organizations
Yeah.
or philanthropic organizations or faith communities or anything like that. I'm sure, I think I remember that you're also going to be working with the 9 cities as well to tune the things that the cities would like
Yeah.
to have included
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
programming as well.
Yeah, it's both. We want to expand both our civic and our community reach.
Right.
So, absolutely.
Councilmember Strong.
I just know, recently, Governor Walz was in town and, Ian, what's his last name? Our media person who was taking video. And so is that something that they have been interacting with you, that they could feed video your way or stories along those lines?
Yeah,
or-
absolutely. We work both the cities to get stuff and then to provide stuff
Okay.
also. So, yeah.
So just trying to
Yeah.
augment that relationship too.
And even more of that is better.
Okay, well, and I know we have a new former reporter on our communications team, so hopefully we can
Yeah,
really.
absolutely.
build
I
up
think
that.
more avenues that you can give people to view things is even better. That's why we're expanding our presence on YouTube in general, in addition to our own website, just to give people as many opportunities to watch it as possible. Because the easier you make for people to consume the content, the more people will consume it.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments from the council? Right, just a double check, is there anyone from the public who wanted to speak to the work that 9 North does in Roseville? All right. Seeing no one, then thank you again for being here this evening. and We
Thank
look
you.
forward to things rolling in the summertime here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Great, with that, then, that brings us to our second item under business items, item 7B, which is to consider awarding a contract for a citywide classification and compensation study. I understand our Assistant City Manager, Rebecca Olson, will be presenting that this evening, and she'll be presenting remotely, unable to be with us this evening.
Yes, and she is online and ready to present. So I'll turn it
Welcome, Ms.
over to her.
Olson.
Good evening, Council, Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity to present virtually. I appreciate that. Tonight, you're being asked to consider awarding a contract for a citywide classification and compensation study. What I wanted to do is go through a couple pieces of that, give you a background and understanding of what we're asking about, the history that we've had with previous systems and studies, and talk through why now and what the cost is. So with that, as part of the 2023 budget that was approved, Council set aside funds to hire a consultant to conduct a classification and compensation study. A little background on what a classification study is. Starting with a job classification, which is a system that groups positions with similar criteria into bands and then allocates the salary grades. A lot of different organizations, both public and private, have job classification systems, and basically the way you can think about a job classification system is similar to how the Army does their ranks. So private, corporal, general, those types of ranks each have different roles and responsibilities, and they're each assigned different pay grades. So that's typically what a job classification system is. And a study of that means that you're going to review the internal equity and the pay relationships within positions within your organization. The compensation study looks at your current pay practices and determines the market competitiveness as well as the internal analysis among positions. So we're asking for both of those as part of this study. And although staff does conduct limited market reviews for various situations, such as union negotiations, job reclassification requests, and annual market comparisons of the system as a whole, a thorough review has not been conducted since 2012. There are industry standards and best practices that really suggest conducting full compensation studies every 3 to 5 years, mainly in order to make sure that your structure is still aligned with your goals and your city's needs, as well as the current labor market. So we're currently looking at this system right now because of a variety of different reasons. One is to help us with our strategic racial equity action plan goals, and as well as the current labor market that we're aware is tightening and shrinking. And so there's likely to be a positive impact on our hiring practices by reviewing our job classification system, for the simple fact that our current job classification system is very heavily weighted on a traditional education degree in order to score our positions and to assign relative worth to the position. Now, although a lot of positions do still require specific education and degrees, you do need to make sure that your system can strike a balance between the need for those specific education requirements, as well as have a path or different emphasis on skills and knowledge that can be obtained through non-traditional career paths and experience. So with all of that, the city released a request for proposal. Excuse me. My apologies. My apologies. The city received 7 responses to the request for proposal. Staff and the city manager reviewed each proposal and selected firms for follow-up interviews. Based on the feedback from the review as well as the interviews, staff is recommending that Abdo be awarded the contract. Abdo, based on their experience in conducting similar studies, their cost, as well as their ability to understand and mitigate the equity impacts with a new classification, were what set them apart from the others. The cost of the proposal by Abdo includes the option that is outlined in the attached addendum to their proposal, and it's a total cost of $56,700. This cost includes conducting a market assessment, development of a pay plan, testing of Minnesota's pay equity rules, which is a unique situation for public entities here in Minnesota, development of strategies for implementation, training for key staff members on the new system, as well as updating them on how to maintain the system, and drafting new job descriptions that align with the classification system. The 2023 budget does have sufficient funds to cover the cost for this proposal, but I do want to point out that this cost does not include the cost to implement any recommendations that may come forward. Those will be outlined in a final report that's presented to council after the conclusion of any study that is completed. So with that, I will stop and I will stand for any questions.
Great, thank you, Ms. Olson. Appreciate your presentation this evening, especially we can see you're a little bit under the weather, and appreciate that you're able to present remotely, and that otherwise you may not have wanted to be able to do it.
She may not want either, right?
Exactly. With that, are there questions from the council? Councilmember Schroeder.
I just have two questions. One is, what was the range of the 7 responses and cost?
Councilmember Schroeder, Mayor, the ranges are very unique because each proposal included different aspects, different things that they would do and how they would do it. But in general, I would say that I think the lowest was in the 40,000s and the highest was closer to 90,000. Depending on which options you included, there were also options for follow-up maintenance systems and things such as that.
Thank you. And then this is kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, but I assume the contract that's in our packet, did the attorney look it over? Or is that internally looked at?
Councilmember Schroeder, Mayor, so typically what happens is we have a standard professional services agreement that we request our vendors complete, and that has been reviewed by our city attorney and updated. And so that's the contract that we will be using. It is the same one that we've used for a lot of our other standard professional services. The contract that they have is very similar to ours, but if there's anything that we need to sign on their end, that would be reviewed by our city attorney as well.
Thank you, because what I did, the only thing I noticed in there is that when you indemnify someone, you'd want it to have dual, so you want them to indemnify us as well as them, and in this contract, it only did them. So I just wanted to make sure legally we were looking at that. So I know that's in the weeds a little bit, but that's the one thing I noticed, so thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from the council? Councilmember Etten.
Ms. Olson, when we are looking at this review and update job descriptions, I would assume, I have 2 parts here. I assume that our staff would need to work with the consultants on this. So can you tell me what they are going to offer? Like, we review and say, hey, make these changes, they go make the changes? Is that, what work are they doing for that $25,000? That's really the almost the majority of this contract. It's almost half of the contract by itself.
Thank you, Councilmember Etten and Mayor. So the review of the job descriptions, obviously they will have to work specifically with each individual department and employees to get, they do an initial position analysis questionnaire. So that's done regardless of if we request them to do job descriptions. And what that initial position analysis questionnaire does is it asks the employee and the supervisor to talk through what their day-to-day activities are, what their roles, what their responsibilities and duties are, so that we can compare that to our current job description, understanding what has happened, what has changed. Writing the new job descriptions can be a very time-consuming process. So once you have identified any knowledge, skills, and abilities, as well as what the outline of the job classification system is, you have to tie that into writing the job summary, writing the position description, including the knowledge, skills, and descriptions. And we currently have close to 100 job descriptions for our 220 employees. And so it can be a very time-consuming process to make sure that you're aligning it with your specific job classification system. There's different criteria in order to include in your job descriptions that you want to tie to different bands so that you have keywords that when you're evaluating them, you know that you're evaluating them in the proper methodology. And so what the consultant would be doing is they would be doing the bulk of that work on the back end. We would develop, they would be ushering us through that position analysis questionnaire. And then what we would do is we would confirm that, yes, these are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are needed. Then they would take that information and they would use it and plug it into a template that we can use and update with all of that language that is tied to that compensation system.
Okay.
I don't know if that answered your question or not.
It does. I appreciate it. It was a good detailed answer. Thank you. I have one more question. Part of the RCA brings up the concern about essentially over-degreed position descriptions. Do we have a sense of percentage of position descriptions out of that 100 positions? Are we looking at 2, 10, 25? Do we have a sense of how many of those positions might be a candidate for looking at lowering the degree requirements or changing those?
Councilmember Etten and Mayor, I don't have specific numbers, but what I can tell you is anecdotally, when we have been reviewing positions during our reclassification process or for requests of reclassification, we have had supervisors tell us, managers tell us, even employees tell us, this says that it needs a bachelor's degree or it needs an advanced degree, but what you need is you need these problem-solving skills, et cetera, et cetera. But we're not able to reduce that because if we reduce the degree with our current compensation system, it lowers the point, which then would lower it into a different grade level. And so I don't have specific numbers, but anecdotally, I would say that over the past 3 or 4 years, we've run into probably at least 4 or 5 situations where we would like to consider additional levels of experience or different skills or knowledge that can be obtained in other pathways, but have not been able to. And so we have not been able to update that job description appropriately.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Councilmember Straley.
Not necessarily a question. I'm working on this process in my professional job as well, so I feel like this is a really robust set of skills, opportunities, that it's compensation as well as classification and degree requirements. It is pretty well known within the HR world right now that degree inflation is a real problem. I think I saw, I don't remember the exact numbers, but that like 60% of manufacturing managers have a degree requirement in their job posting, but only 16% of them actually, of the current managers in manufacturing hold a degree. So it has been a while that the degree inflation has occurred, and it really is an equity piece, so I really appreciate that. I'm excited to see what can come of this. I was just wondering, will there be kind of setting up bands then, kind of so that there's laterals and kind of like that succession ladder and kind of a succession plan set up within this?
Councilmember Strawn, Mayor, that is one thing that we specifically asked about, and depending on how the process lays out, there may be opportunities for that, but that is something that we specifically asked about because it's something that we would like to, for certain positions, figure out pathways. It can help with our hiring, it can help with our retention, it can help with learning, it can help with a lot of pieces.
Just to clarify, I meant not secession as in we are leaving, but succession. Sorry. We are not leaving anything, we are elevating. Thank
That's a
you.
whole other conversation.
Yes, which we are not having.
All right. Other questions for staff? If not, I did just want to clarify one small piece, which is I know in another organization I was involved with, they did a similar study and analysis, and one of the points of analysis was to look at in the various positions or the various types of jobs throughout the organization, are there places where, we as an organization are targeting, sort of the most experienced and most capable people? Are there other positions where we're perfectly okay to sort of be the first job somebody gets out of school or out of whatever their source of training might be, or maybe just, their first job ever in life? So that there's an analysis that way too, because sometimes you can try to be really competitive for wages, but you're actually, your job is set up to be requiring so much experience and whatnot that you're looking for the people that are already farther along in their career versus the people just starting out. So do we make those conscious decisions as part of this process that we're looking for, for this particular type of job? We're not looking for people that have got more experience. We're looking for new people coming in, understanding that there might be more churn and that sort of thing. Hopefully that's a clear question. I know it kind of went on.
Thank you, Mayor. I understood what you were getting at. I don't know if I'll have a fantastic response other than my hope is that our consultant will help guide us through those conversations, help us understand the various things that we want to look at, both as we develop a classification system, but also as we look at that compensation study and the market analysis. I know that they've got a lot of experience, and they've talked about helping us develop some philosophies, or at least helping us understand what our philosophy is when it comes to those. So they would probably be the best facilitator of those conversations at the beginning of this process.
Okay. And I think typically those types of consultants have that understanding of that aspect of things. But I just think in terms of always trying to make sure we're careful about the taxpayer dollars, that, we're not looking for summer park people who have, master's degree and things like that. It just, doesn't quite fit with the value that we're trying to provide for our taxpayers as well. So just wanted to make sure that was a piece of it. And like I said, I'm pretty sure that the consultants are up to speed on that and will be able to help us through that process. All right, with that, if there's no other questions from the council, this will be an opportunity for public comment. If there's anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this item this evening, either remotely or here in the chambers. It doesn't appear that we have anybody in the chambers that wishes to speak. Do we have any hands raised, or do we have anybody left in the public?
No hands raised.
All right. With that, then, we've got the request before us. Councilmember Adler?
Mayor, I have another question.
Okay.
In the proposal from OBDO, they kind of outline their contract tasks and costs, and most things line up. But actually, that last addendum piece, I don't see in here. Am I missing that? The review and update job descriptions at $25,000.
You're saying it wasn't in the proposal in the packet?
Yes, correct. I can't find it yet.
Option one on.
My apologies. I thought it was updated and included. I'm just pulling up the packet. My
It's in
apologies.
the letter, but this has the,
Did you say you found it, Councilmember Groff?
No.
well, there's just.
I
this
believe
part.
it should be on the second to last page
I thought I'd seen
of the packet. It's in the online packet. I don't know if it was,
It's on the letter. There's this,
Yeah.
about this.
the
thing.
last
It's like
page, yeah.
just two lines of it, so.
So it was listed as option A.
Page
Option one.
41 of 42 of the package.
Do you have it? Mm-hmm. Okay.
would you like me to pull it up on the screen?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay.
So they had two options, actually. There was a second option that
Right.
it was just a different version, I guess, of that. Okay. All right, once again, we've got the request before us to enter into the agreement with ADO. Councilmember Groff.
I'd move to authorize the city manager to enter into a professional services agreement with OBDO to conduct a classification and compensation study in the amount of $56,700.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Groff, seconded by Councilmember Strawn. Discussion on the motion. We'll begin with the maker of the motion, Councilmember Groff.
A couple things stood out to me when I was reading through this. Number one is that it hadn't been done for several years, and I think it's really important to review these positions and make sure that they line up with today's needs. In one of the sentences, it says, over the past decade, job duties have gradually shifted, and there have been changes in organizational relationships and responsibilities and skills and qualifications. So I think that is the crucial part that tonight that I'm addressing, but I also really am pleased with the addressing equity issues and inclusion. I think this team is really focused on that and understands it from what I've been reading, and so I am supporting it and would like to proceed. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Strawn as the seconder.
Nothing further.
Thank you. Other discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none, we've got the motion before us to authorize entering into the agreement with ABDO as outlined. With no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and that agreement is authorized. All right, go feel better, Assistant City Manager.
Yes. Have some tea.
Thank you for coming and doing this online. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right. That then brings us to our third business item this evening, item 7C, which is to consider entering into a fencing consortium joint powers agreement, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Trudgeon for this item. Mr. Trudgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and if I could have Chief Brosnahan and Chief Scheider come up to the table to help answer questions as we go through the presentation. Let me just, I don't have a PowerPoint, but I'll just turn this off here. So tonight I'm bringing forward a request to consider joining the Fencing Consortium Joint Powers Agreement. The Fencing Consortium was created to provide the ability for cities to secure anti-scale fencing to protect city assets and allow for First Amendment right protests to be occurring after a critical incident. In the immediate aftermath of George Floyd's murder, beyond peaceful demonstrations and marches, Minneapolis and St. Paul did encounter civil unrest that destroyed both public and private property, and also led to direct confrontation between community members, law enforcement, and the Minnesota National Guard. Among the buildings that were destroyed was the Minneapolis Police Department's 3rd Precinct headquarters. In 2021, with the killing of Dante Wright in Brooklyn Center, there were protests centered around the Brooklyn Center Police Department headquarters. In this instance, fencing was put up soon after the critical incident. As a result, while people gathered outside the police headquarters to express their anger and grief in demanding justice, there was limited property destruction. While there were some confrontations between protesters and law enforcement, the fencing did help limit that interaction. As noted in Police Chief Scheider's memo to the council, the experiences both in Minneapolis and Brooklyn Center help demonstrate the critical role that fencing provides for de-escalation and establishing safe spaces for lawful protest. The goal of anti-scale fencing is to be a de-escalation tool that will keep demonstrators and law enforcement separate, while at the same time protecting city assets and infrastructure. The fencing will also allow first responders and demonstrators to operate in a safer space. Without fencing in place, there are a variety of challenges and negative consequences, including the inability to create physical separation, which can escalate tensions, a need for crowd control measures to be used, a lack of clearly designated space for legal protesting, and the need to use significant public safety resources to protect city facilities and infrastructure. The Fencing Consortium was created in the aftermath of the killings of George Floyd and Dante Wright, based on the lessons learned from the protests and the civil arrests that occurred. The Fencing Consortium itself has secured a lease for fencing from a local vendor to store, maintain, and have at the ready enough anti-scale fencing to deploy after a critical event. Currently, there are 30 cities that belong to the Fencing Consortium. In Ramsey County, that includes Maplewood, Mounds View, New Brighton, North St. Paul, and White-Bear Lake, all of which have their own police departments. They all belong to the Fencing Consortium. If the City Council were to approve entering into the Fencing Consortium, staff will amend the emergency management plan to include, among other things, creation of a policy about what triggers the deployment of the fencing, how and who makes that decision, and to ask the consortium for the use of the fencing, what operations would continue to operate at the city campus, and what procedures would be put in place for staff, first responders, and policymakers to be at the city campus and conduct city business. The emergency plan would also update policies and procedures about the timing around demobilization of the fencing. While a lot of the action in the aftermath of a critical incident will depend on the particular circumstances, having standard procedures and protocols in place will help ensure a more orderly response. In regards to, just to focus on this point a little bit, in regards to making the decision to request deployment of fencing, I expect that that decision will be made collectively by the police chief, fire chief, operating as the emergency manager, and me, the city manager, in consultation with the mayor and city council. Ultimately, should be noted that the request for deployment of fencing will need to be approved by the Fencing Consortium Board of Directors before any fencing is delivered. Specific to Roseville's participation with the Fencing Consortium, staff has determined that the amount of fencing to properly secure the campus, and that is about 1,780 lineal feet. The Fencing Consortium currently has available to them 3,500 lineal feet, so our needs will certainly be able to be met. The cost to join the Fencing Consortium for Roseville is estimated to be about $9,000. This amount is based on a pro rata share of the fence that we will need available, as well as a surcharge by the consortium to partially cover the cost paid previously by the founding members in setting up the Fencing Consortium. The fencing is stored in a warehouse here in the Twin Cities and should be able to be deployed within 24 hours, hopefully much sooner. I've seen some estimates that they hope to have it up by 8 hours. It's certainly going to depend on the time and the conditions and location. Public Works staff and consortium members will install the fencing. As part of the agreement, we would commit 2 of our employees, Public Works employees, to be trained and be ready on call to be deployed for the fencing. They don't expect every single Public Works employee to be called. If they have a large membership group, they only need about 30 or 35, is my understanding. If we actually do call for the deployment of fencing, There would be an additional charge to the city for the actual use of the fence. Based on our needs on a lineal feet, it would be about $20,000 to have the fence deployed for a full month. Last week, I do want to mention that the Multicultural Advisory Committee, or MAC, discussed the fencing consortium. Given that the fact that only a few members of the MAC were able to make the meeting, the group did not make a recommendation regarding joining the fence consortium, but put it on a future agenda for additional discussion by the full group. Police Chief Scheider has committed to continue to work with the MAC to discuss how to minimize use of fencing and formulate a plan with the MAC for engagement with the community after a critical incident. The Fencing Consortium Board will be closing the opportunity to join the consortium by the end of February, which is just in a couple days here, for an undetermined period of time. I believe that's in an effort to ensure that they have enough fencing and resources for the current members. In fact, they are aware that we have this agenda item on the meeting tonight and are holding off on closing membership until Roseville does make a decision. Staff does recommend the City of Roseville enter into the Fencing Consortium Joint Powers Authority Agreement by approving the resolution in the packet. Police Chief Scheider, Fire Chief Brosnahan, and I, as City Manager, strongly believe this is an appropriate action to take to ensure the safety of demonstrators, the public, city staff, as well as to protect city assets and facilities. As I mentioned in the staff report, for many people, putting up the fence around city buildings, including the police department, may be seen as an intentional barrier to shield the police department and the city from the impact and consequences of our employees' action. We acknowledge that many will continue to feel that way regardless of the city's justification. It is important for the city to keep that in mind after a critical incident. Putting up a fence after a critical incident is not intended to be the only action the city takes. We will need to take additional measures to make sure that we work with the community and engage them directly and help provide transparency in what occurred and create space for dialogue between city leaders and the community for accountability for those involved and consider changes to policies and procedures as necessary. So once again, I ask your consideration for approving the resolution to join the Fence Consortium Joint Powers Authority by passing the resolution as an attachment D. I do have Chief Scheider and Brosnahan here to help answer any questions you may have, and I'll be happy to answer any questions as well. That's the end of the presentation.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. Are there questions from the council for staff on this request? Councilmember Strawn.
I have many. Can you tell us what that 1,780 linear feet covers on our campus?
Yes, so the area that is covered will be essentially from, the area that we'll be covering will be essentially from the Public Works Building at the entrance to the parking lot in Civic Center Drive, south to County Road C, then moving east to essentially the bike path along Lexington, north up into the edge of the Public Works Building on the east side, if that makes sense. So essentially, the fencing area would be the entire parking lot area of City Hall and the City Hall building, and then the front grass area south of the building.
So it would include the fire department
No, it goes right up to the edge of the fire department.
and doesn't include the oval, so it's just basically City Hall and the police department.
Correct.
So I guess I have concerns because obviously the fence in Minneapolis didn't necessarily stop any destruction. Concerned about the costs involved. We're told that within 24 hours, although if we had an egregious situation, that much damage could occur in that amount of time. And I do have a lot of concern about bringing this forward, especially without the MAC input, because we rely on large decisions. And I think, although this is monetarily not huge, I think this is a pretty large decision in the face of what people see as over-policing. And I think that a lot of people in the community are going to want to have input, and I would think that at the least we would task the MAC with being our input. I was also curious to know what would happen to our funding needs then if other cities pulled out of this consortium. I know that most the cities, the Ramsey County Sheriff, that any of that are monitored by Ramsey County Sheriff, and then for some reason Lauderdale are also not involved, which is most of the people in around us except for Maplewood. And Minneapolis probably has their own set of fencing, but so I'm just kind of like, okay, that's a lot of people around us who are not involved. But I think my biggest concern revolves around St. Paul also being part of this, So if there was an event that didn't necessarily happen here, something like Philando Castillo or some other horrifying event again, which we hope and pray never happens, but that we wouldn't be the highest priority, that we would be part of such a consortium, and then if there was a need in St. Paul or whatever, that we wouldn't have the opportunity to even be participating. So I don't know if there's any comment on that particular.
The first process of the board, it does tend to be a first come, first serve, as far as that process goes. The other piece of our emergency management planning process is to have a secondary or backup option. And we do have a couple different options that we could utilize if for some reason the fence is either not available or there isn't enough footage to protect our area.
Okay. Do we have insurance that would cover damage if damage were to occur? If we were not to be part of this or something?
Well, yeah, certainly there's property insurance, but there are deductibles as well. I don't know what those are, but if
Okay.
you're talking about total destruction of a building, that is going to be quite the...
Right. Is there any impact on our insurance if we were to participate in this? Does it decrease our premiums for risk, or does it change anything along those lines?
Councilmember Strawn, I am not aware of how that would affect. We haven't asked that particular question. I think obviously offering more protection would be more helpful, but whether that leads to rate reduction, I don't know.
Okay. And yeah, I guess I'm just concerned that the end of February is actually tomorrow, and that this is the first time it has come to the council. With so many other cities having committed, it seems like this information has been out there for a while, and that we're just learning of it. My largest concern is about not having any citizen commission that has advised us, especially around equity issues and optics, about how communities of color would feel about this being a policing method, especially, we can say that it's about allowing protesters the opportunity, but that may not be the perception that others would have.
Tonight, if I could just add to that, we did have our MAC meeting last week. This was a discussion. We also, our MAC chair sent it out for input, and we didn't get any input emailed back for those who weren't able to make the meeting. Unfortunately, there was only 3 of them there, but we did have a discussion about this and are going to continue to follow up on discussions on what can we do to, first of all, prevent an incident from hopefully happening in Roseville. But if we do have civil unrest, whether it's here at City Hall or somewhere else, how can our MAC be involved in helping to de-escalate that? So there will be continued discussions. But unfortunately, at this meeting, we only had 3 people there for the discussion, so we didn't think it was fair to bring back information representing the whole group.
And just to clarify, then the fence use would only be to protect City Hall if that were needed, or City Hall and the police department. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for staff from the council? Councilman McGraw.
So if we do enter into this, is this reviewed? How often is it reviewed, or are we on this permanently as a contract?
I don't know if I think it's annual. I think you can.
Well, I think we can leave whenever we choose
Okay.
to. There's an out if after a year we decide we don't want to do that, or after a couple of years on that. But we're in that as long as we're willing to be in it.
Because obviously, if we do find out that we never get to use it because St. Paul's asking for it, I don't see what the advantage to us, but at least we could review it and continue. I am concerned about the timeline and the approval process. I have full confidence in you, but if we have a change of managers in the city, that's a concern for me. I mean, I'm also concerned that if it has to go before the board, how long does that take, and what's the process for that?
Yep, I wanted to clarify that. Councilmember Strawn, I think, brought up the timing. The consortium's goal is 8 hours or less to have fencing on site, maybe not fully set up, but from the moment that you contact the board to make the request, very quickly they will make a board decision, because they can do it virtually, and then start the process of getting equipment out there. So their goal initially is 8 hours or less. Through training that they're going to be doing with Public Works employees, the goal is to get it to 5 or 6 or less hours.
And who's on the board?
It is made up of a group of folks. It is 5 total. It is 2 folks from law enforcement, 1 from emergency management, 1 from fire, and 1 from Public Works. And so it's just kind of a rotating. There are 2 different positions, I think, that are up for election.
And it's from all the cities that are
Yes,
members?
all these cities that are represented.
Thank you.
there any DEI consideration in that? Is there any person who's trained in DEI that's on that commission, on the consortium?
That I don't know.
Okay.
Other council member questions? Councilmember Bratton?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you all for working on this. I've gotten a fair amount of feedback from questions, and I appreciate the outline that you gave at the beginning of the presentation, kind of around some of the policy pieces. I think I would agree with some of the concerns raised around timing. To have something show up that we have to by tomorrow is rarely how we like to operate and make decisions, and I would agree that the financing isn't as big of a deal as how this might be perceived in the community. So if it is approved, I think we need to have a more robust and more open thinking about how we establish our criteria for when we would choose to ask for this fencing. It's fine to say we're going to have it, but we don't have anything. We don't have any frame for that. I don't know if there is a model plan the consortium is working on or other cities have developed, but I wouldn't want to get into a crisis and then say, oh, crap, do we need a fence? But that we would think about this now instead of down the road if there was a crisis. And I would like to understand more, consulting with the mayor and the city council. Is that a, hey, by the way, we're asking for this now? Is it a vote of the council? What is that trigger that would make the city then be going to the consortium?
So, yeah, and that's something that we have to feel out during the process. I think when you're dealing with emergency situations, you don't have the luxury of waiting to the next council meeting. You
Yeah.
can certainly have an emergency council meeting. That's something we'll have to talk through if that's what we want to be able to do, but I think you still want to allow for some ability for staff to be able to make a call and in some urgent, circumstances. My intention all along would be to keep the council informed of what we're thinking, where we're thinking, and receive feedback in regards to that. But at some point, we need to make the decision. And in the past, when we've had emergency events, we've had special meetings on a Saturday morning to deal with storm events. And depending on the timing, that certainly may be able to be worked in, but it would have to be pretty quickly decided on that. I think we would want to trust the professionals, law enforcement and emergency management, to give their feedback and certainly weigh in everybody else's opinion before we make that decision, but oftentimes it's going to have to be made pretty quickly. That's just the nature of what's going to happen.
And if I may just add, I think that there's, as we saw a couple of years ago, there's a step where in consultation with our emergency management professionals and the city manager, the mayor can also declare an emergency, a local emergency without council, but that only is for a limited amount of time. I think it's 3 days or something along those lines. And then, subsequent continuation of such an emergency would also require council action. So that's another mechanism that I would expect would be worked into however the decision-making process happened, so that there is still that accountability part of it as well. Obviously, one mayor is not the full council necessarily, but also it's a limited authority, but it does provide at least a little more of a connection to the community, and I think that's the way it was set up under state law to be that way. And certainly, I think I understand the notion that personnel can change, but I think that the idea of putting protocols and policies in place is very important, because then those outlast whoever the individuals might be. And hopefully they're robust enough and good enough to serve anybody in the community going forward, and also can be updated and amended over time as we gain experience or other people's experience informs us. Other questions or comments? Councilmember Schroeder.
It's unfortunate that we find ourselves in this environment, that we're even considering something like this. And I appreciate you bringing this forward, and I think it's right that you don't want to be all of a sudden thinking, oh, darn, we need a fence, and now what do we do, and how do we figure that out? Whoever thought that would even be something we'd be worried about at this point. But I do see in here, I read about we can withdraw, and so in a way, if we approve it tonight, it's for at least just a year, and we could withdraw after that, is my understanding. Is that correct?
I believe it is a year.
So, yeah, so that was, so it's not like we are committed to this for 20 years. So that, from, I know time is short, and so that at least would be the, that would be what we'd be on the hook for, is that year. And then you could see how it's working at that point.
And just to follow on to that too, certainly it's still, even if we are participating in the consortium, it's still our decision as the city of Roseville as to whether we actually request deployment of the fence based on circumstances, and there may not be any circumstances that call for it. Councilmember Groff.
Well, we hope there are none,
Right.
That's for sure. I am concerned because everybody's white in this room, and I really would have liked to have more BIPOC input on this, because it is a societal issue that really, even though we're presenting it as just safety and so on, it has a racial component. So I just think we all need to be mindful of that, and I'm speaking that out right now because that needs to be put out there.
All right. Councilmember Strawn, and I also do want to make sure there's an opportunity for public comment as well. Councilmember Strawn.
I agree fully, again, with that piece, and that's kind of why I felt like the MAC is one of our,
Remind us what MAC is.
the Multicultural Advisory Commission that works with the police department. And if we're down to 3 people, maybe we need to work to help you build that back up, because there was a great interest a couple years ago in being an active part of that, and I'm sure.
And I think to clarify, it was just 3 people that were able to attend the meeting this particular time, and not that there's only 3 people on the committee.
That is correct.
Yeah. But I think it's unfortunate that we're at this point where we didn't have that input. We don't have a recommendation or not from them, and then we don't know more about our policy for deployment of the fence, and then we don't know much about what the priority would be. First come, first serve, it sounds great, but if us and St. Paul both call at the same time, I kind of feel like they'd give it to St. Paul, because that's that's where the greater need would be. Even between us and Maplewood, depending on where it was, there might be a greater need for some of the services. So those are really big concerns as far as our timing. And I'm opposed to spending dollars if we don't think we're ever going to use it, or if we don't think we're going to have access to the items. So that's.
Mr. Trudgeon.
Just a couple follow-up questions from the conversation. So it's been mentioned a couple times, kind of this last second moment making a decision, and I fully appreciate the concern about bringing something when we have a deadline. As I communicated to the council at the end of January, some background, wanted to provide some information. We learned soon after that the Defense Consortium was having a deadline by the end of February. The intention wasn't to rush it through anything, so we felt we had to use the month of February the best we can to bring it forward. Gave as much time as possible so we could interact with the MAC in particular. Unfortunately, this couldn't happen until last week here. So we would like to have done it a lot differently too. So, but I understand the trepidation, but it certainly wasn't intentional. We're not trying to sneak up on anybody on this item. We wanted to have a longer road so we could talk about this in deeper conversations. I have felt this throughout the whole process in talking about it, starting in the fall. It brings you to places you don't want to be thinking about what would happen, and it's kind of an icky conversation to have, what would happen in situations like this, and you end up thinking about the worst possible things. In the end, after processing that, in my mind, I think this is something that's important to take into account. The fact whether we join the consortium or not, if a critical incident happens, we're going to be looking for fencing. And why not put ourselves in a better position to have better access to it than not? I think after some of the events the last couple of years, every city started looking around and contacting, and we even contacted fence vendors. Nobody had any stock here. Nobody had any ability to turn stuff around quickly. That's why the fencing consortium is a unique idea to help facilitate that better. It's not going to be perfect, depending on timing and all those things, but the fact is, regardless of whether we join this or not, we'll be looking for some fencing on some limited basis. And I think it's better for us to be in a position where we can have access to fencing depending on the circumstances than not in scrambling. And there's a lot of possibilities where it may not work out perfectly as we would like it to because of other competing cities, but I still think being in the game is better than not being in the game. But also just mention about the policies. I understand maybe wanting to see more thought on that. Once again, this has accelerated pretty quickly. We also wanted to make sure that there was buy-in by the council and approval by the council before we got too deep into that policy making. There's a lot of things going on all at once here, so we want to make sure we have the time to do that. But once we're receiving approval, then that's something I think we can turn around pretty quickly. But we don't have that in front of you tonight. So those are just some additional comments I just wanted to provide in regards to this, and hopefully that helps you sort this out.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. Why don't we provide an opportunity if there is anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this, and maybe ask the chiefs to have a seat away from the table for a moment, just so we can open up the mics for public comment.
Hey, Roger Hess Jr., Wagner Place. I mean, we need a whole lot more input before we ever do anything like this. But practically, if something happened at 4 p.m. on a Wednesday, you really think people are going to wait 8 or 24 hours before they come here to try doing something? I don't think so. And if you're only going to surround this building and not the other ones, when they do arrive, they'll get even angrier because they can't get this one. So then they're going to go to the fire department or public works or the ice center, and those have actual really expensive equipment in them. I'd rather sacrifice this building than those buildings. So unless you're going to surround those with fences too, which then would cause the people to go out in the neighborhoods and start wrecking houses and things. So it's just, there's not enough fencing to cover the whole campus. And it doesn't seem like it's very worthwhile. I mean, when the Black Lives Matter people were going to have a protest at Roseville a few years ago, it didn't take long for the Roseville Police Department to gather up a whole lot of people to guard Rosedale, and they got a lot of equipment. They got towers and all sorts of things in a very quick time, and they took care of that, which actually they did what the BLM wanted to do. They shut down Rosedale for a while, just be having the police presence there, so the Black Lives Matter people didn't even show up for the protests because the city shut it down for them. But anyway, I'm just worried. I'd rather have this building go than the ones that have expensive equipment in them. I mean, you can harden the IT area so people couldn't get in there very easily. I'm sure the armory and the property room in the police department are heavily sealed up. And even the police department has pretty much tiny windows on the outside, so you can't really get in there anyway. And you can harden the outside doors and windows in other ways, but it just seems like it's not going to do what you want it to do. And if you did cover this building, they'd go wreck something else that's closer, because they're going to be even more angry because they can't go where they want to go. Thank you.
And thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else from the public either participating remotely? If there is anyone or here in the chambers, it doesn't appear that we have other members of the public this evening. Mr. Trudgeon, anyone participating online?
No.
Right, then we can close the opportunity for public comment this evening on this item, simply for the lack of other people to comment. And appreciate all the comments that were made. I guess just in personal response, I don't think we want to be in a position where we're deciding to sacrifice any city facilities or buildings. I mean, it all has costs associated with it, and that's not an objective that we, I don't think, would want to have. And I'm just thinking back to the experience in our northwestern neighbor most recently. I don't know that we saw an extensive amount of issues outside of the city hall sort of facility. Not to say there weren't issues, because definitely people had issues outside of that, in terms of whether it was, tear gas in their apartments and things like that in some of the neighboring buildings. I don't want to say that there aren't issues, but I think that certainly the focus tends to be the city facility if it is something that involves an action of the city. And so that's a part of the consideration here. And once again, I'm not necessarily arguing that we need to do something or not doing something, just trying to attempt to sort of be responsive to the comment. And I'd certainly be willing to open it up for council consideration, since we've got the request before us, since we do have the time limit imposed upon us, and see how the council wishes to proceed. Councilmember Schroeder.
I would move to approve this.
I'll second it.
It's been moved by Councilmember Schroeder, seconded by Councilmember Groff to enter into the consortium as requested. Discussion on the motion. As the maker of the motion, Councilmember Schroeder.
And I would remind everyone, we did get a letter from the police chief earlier and for us to look at. And so it isn't like tonight was the first night we saw this, so we've had some time, not as much time as we wish everyone could have, but we did have a little more time. And again, since it's only, we're committing to a year if we wanted to get out versus not being able to get into it then if we decide later, if they're going to stop accepting members, I think it would make sense for us to go ahead and do this.
All right. As the second of the motion, Councilmember Groff.
Well, I'm trusting the administration, I'm trusting the police chief and the fire chief on this. This is your jobs. I know you've researched this carefully, and I would not want to be in a position where I put the city in a spot where we aren't able to get fencing if some incident did occur. I'm also, as Councilmember Schroeder said, it's a one-year contract, and I would like to take that year to collect information from more people in the city and to find out what they think. It might sound sort of backwards, but actually putting this in place might get more of a response, and then we can find out what people actually think. That tends to be when I hear from people is when some action has been taken rather than when it's just been considered. So those are my reasons for voting for it.
Thank you, Councilmember Groff. Other discussion on the motion? Councilmember Strong.
I would just like to make sure that any decisions about deployment of this fence are brought to a wide arrangement and array of people, including the MAC and maybe the HRIEC, so that they, and maybe including Mr. Brooks and his DEI lens, so that they reflect the perceptions and really the lived experience of people outside of just Caucasian Roseville, because at least 25-30% of Roseville doesn't exactly look like the people in this room, and really I want to make sure that we're that they're part of the conversation.
Additional discussion on the motion, Councilman Bratton.
I will support this. I think we've all spoken about some, or several have spoken about some concerns going forward, so I will look for probably something faster than that 1 year. In the next couple of months, more robust connection with community as has been described by others, so that we are thinking ahead here as we move from this point.
Right. And, I will support the motion, and I understand all of the concerns that have been raised, and I think that they're important concerns and are worthy to have that follow-up on. I do appreciate the notion that, after a year, we have the opportunity to back out per the terms. And I feel, I don't like to be put in the position of having to act under a deadline, and if there was a way to delay, I think the intention of staff, it sounds like, was to have a longer process before getting to this decision point. And certainly, this is something that I've been aware of the consortium's existence, at least, for probably since it began. There was some discussion amongst various elected officials and city management folks and things like that over time, and questions about whether or not to get into the consortium. And I think early on, my feeling was, well, let's find out more. Let's wait and see how it goes. And so I wasn't pushing for a lot of community conversation immediately, because it wasn't an issue that I was looking to put before the people of Roseville, before it had some wider vetting outside of our community. And so, it was one thing to be aware of it, but it was another thing certainly to be coming to some decision points. And I don't think any of us, like the timing of this and how it came down in terms of, having the limited opportunity to get into the consortium. I think it's a lot like insurance in that you do spend money on it and you do hope you never use it, and I think that's the objective. You certainly, put in sprinkler systems in your buildings to avoid fires, and you put in procedures and things like that to avoid people having, workers' comp claims, not that they don't happen anyway, but, you're always trying to make sure that you're avoiding the costs and the risks. And it's very important to be focused on that and continue to be focused on that, but it also makes sense to be prudent to take advantage of an opportunity for this very specialized type of fencing. And that's, I think, a key part of it too, is that it's not something that it's just, that you can just call up Midwest Fence and they can drop it on your doorstep tomorrow because they've got it in their warehouse. It's something that is very specialized, it's non-scalable, and is designed for a specific purpose, and so that's important to note. And I would also note, in relation to some of the damage that occurred in Minneapolis, I don't believe there was non-scalable fencing protecting some of those facilities that were damaged, and so that was a lesson that I think the people in Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, learned through their process from what happened in the past. And I think all of us need to continue to learn, and it's not only learning about sort of the physical things that work better or the procedures and policies that work better, but it's also how we can take the steps to make sure that we don't have to be in a position of having to deploy this type of fencing. But I think it's prudent on behalf of the taxpayers to at least put something in place that gives us the opportunity to be able to protect our assets and our infrastructure appropriately if need be, and certainly we all do not want that to be a need that we ever have happen. So with that, I'm supportive of the motion. Councilmember Strong.
I just wanted to, I am not going to support this, and I just feel we are elected to represent the will of our people, and I don't know that this reflects the will of citizens because they haven't had time to fully know or understand it. Not that they wouldn't support it if they knew more, but I just feel like there's a lack, and obviously not suggesting that the city is trying to pull one over on us. It's really not any malice or intent that I feel is adversarial. It's just, I feel like there should be at least one person who recognizes that more people probably should be part of this conversation.
I don't think any of us question that there shouldn't be more people part of the conversation. With that, we have the motion before us. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
That passes 4-1 with Councilmember Strong in opposition. And that brings us to the end of our business items this evening then. Thank you, everyone. That then brings us to consideration of one set of council meeting minutes, the minutes of our January 30th, 2023 meeting. The council's had an opportunity to review those minutes and provide feedback to staff. The draft that we've seen presented to us reflects any feedback that's been provided. Do we have any changes or corrections that need to be made to those minutes, or a motion to approve as presented?
Move approval.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Groff, seconded by Councilmember Etten to approve the minutes of January 30th, excuse me, as presented. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Those minutes are approved. That brings us then to consideration of the consent items, with the exception of 10J, which was taken up earlier this evening. Mr. Trudgeon, would you introduce the remaining consent items for us?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me just pull up the screen here. All right, so agenda item 10A approves payments in the amount of $1,702,751.80. Agenda item 10B approves a temporary liquor license to St. Rose of Lima for an event on April 1st, as well as a temporary gambling permit for the same event. Additionally, this action also approves a temporary gambling permit for Local 49 of the International Union of Operating Engineers for an event at Midland Hills Country Club on July 17th. Item 10C approves expenditures for major vegetation removal and various stormwater ditches. Item 10D certifies unpaid utility and other charges to the property tax rolls. The delinquent accounts are for those that are 60 days past due as of December 31st, 2022. Item 10E approves entering into an agreement with the property owner at 2210 Terminal Road for an easement crossing of the city-owned parcel to the property parking lot from Long Lake Road. Item 10F adopts a resolution approving a conditional use to allow for a parking lot to be a principal use at 2373 and 2395 County Road C2. The parking lot would provide parking for employees at the adjacent FedEx facility at 2929 Long Lake Road. The Planning Commission did approve this request on a 7-0 vote at their last meeting. Item 10G approves applying for a state Pathways to Policing grant in the amount of $20,000 to help cover the costs related to expenses for the Roseville Police Department CSOs and cadets. We have applied for and received funding through this Pathways to Policing grant program before, and I found the funding very helpful in recruiting and retaining persons interested in becoming a police officer. Item 10H approves entering into a professional service agreement with St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce to provide administrative services to the Rice-Larpenteur Alliance and to enter into a cooperative funding agreement with the cities of St. Paul and Maplewood regarding continued funding for the Alliance. These agreements are the same that Roseville has entered into for the past couple of years, and as part of the cooperative funding agreement, the city will provide $40,000 to the Alliance as in previous years, and that is contained in the EDA budget. Then finally, item 10I approves entering into an agreement with J&M Display for fireworks for the Roseville 4th of July celebration.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. Is there a motion on the consent items A through I?
To move.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Schroeder, seconded by Councilmember Ratten. Any discussion on the motion? I just want to note a couple of things. I thought there was a very good discussion at the Planning Commission on the conditional use request and a thorough
Yes.
analysis of the issues. And then just also wanted to note for folks, speaking of the Rice and Larpenteur Alliance, as that item is on our consent agenda here, the Rice and Larpenteur Alliance does have their annual gathering event tomorrow night at 5:30 at the Hand in Hand Montessori over in southeast Roseville. And so encourage folks that are in that area, if you're interested to find out what's going on with the Alliance, to attend that event. So just wanted to make folks aware of that. With that, we've got the motion before us. No discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and those items are approved or accepted. Then next on our agenda, we have future agenda review and announcements or communications. We'll start with the future agenda. Mr. Trudgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As we noted earlier, we're on the verge of March, and we have a very busy March for City Council. So we have a meeting next week on March 6th. We do have an appeal for Prince of Peace Church regarding the micro-housing units. We've been providing some background, provide additional information. The City Council will actually be seated as the Board of Appeals and Adjustment. And so that is something that you'll still be within this meeting here, but we'll just kind of transition to that, change hats, so to speak, on that. We also want to bring back continued discussion on the zoning code update, Phase 2, that Ms. Gunlock brought forward a couple months ago. Consider awarding ARPA funds to grants to nonprofits. We did, was it 4? I think we received 4 requests. So I'll be bringing those forward. We also will receive the equity update and receive the city workforce report from our equity and inclusion manager, Mr. Brooks. The following 2 evenings, and I think there was an email sent right before the meeting by Rachel Boggs, on March 7th and 8th, we'll be interviewing for commission applicants. I would note, I think on the 7th, the meeting will be held at the Oval, and the 8th at Cedar Home. Cedar Home was unavailable for one of those nights. I could have that backwards, but so it's in the email, but we'll be kind of splitting up the interviews and try to go from 6 to 8 p.m. And we are still open for applicants till March 1st, so if you know of anybody, please let them know.
Is that through the end of the day, March 1st?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wednesday.
Yep. Then on March 13th, we will have an EDA meeting. We will have a presentation by broker regarding industrial development, just kind of the trends, and also discuss a small business micro grant program that we have alluded to before, but want to talk a bit more in substance about it. At the regular meeting, we'll have the excess cash reserve report, the interfund loan payback for Lexington Shops, and also talk about the massage therapy code amendments and trying to bring that closer to approval and get something on the books. On the 20th, right now we have Brahma Vista's final plat and also a fire department presentation regarding advanced life support and update on their activities. So that's what we have in store for March.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. Questions on the future agenda, Councilmember
Do
Stern?
we also meet on March 27th?
No, we just have 3 meetings.
Thank you.
Are there any council member initiated items for future meetings or council announcements or liaison reports? Councilmember Strong.
In follow-up to what we asked earlier, I'm not sure what mechanism would be put in place to consider a fine arts master plan or some type of art master plan. Is that something we could?
Perhaps we could
ask the
get
city
something
to-
from the staff on that?
Yes, certainly. I know that's maybe been talked a little bit internally with the Parks Department, but I'm not sure where that's at, so we can get some additional information, bring it forward as necessary to
Sure.
have a deeper conversation. I think it would not just be a one conversation, it'd be
No, I
multiple
think it'd be a
conversations.
long,
A lot of engagement.
Well, you need a lot of community input on something
Yeah,
like that.
absolutely.
in my opinion.
Absolutely, but as we are engaging people in other processes right now, it might be a nice time to include them. Just I think it's good to look at it holistically.
Sure. And just in light of our process that we have, is there any objection from the council to just have that as an item on a future agenda rather than treating it as a councilmember requested future item? Save us a little aggravation. Nothing else? Thanks. All right. No objection. All right, anything else from council members in terms of announcements, liaison reports, et cetera? Councilmember Groff.
Did have a NYFS meeting, and we're finally coming out of the COVID time. We're not out of it entirely, but had quite a year of adjustments, as you heard from our new executive director, or not new anymore, but she seems like she's been there a while, because she's really had her task cut out for her. But, so things are going pretty well there, and then also visit Roseville. I know we had the report from them, and you've heard most of that. I won't reiterate it, but things that turned around there, we are, the city's doing well, the hospitality industries are doing well, much better. Not back to before, not back to 2018, but, so things are very positive there, and that's the reports from those two.
All right. Anything else from council members this evening? If there's nothing else, the final item on our agenda is adjournment. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Etten, seconded by Councilmember Strawn to adjourn. No discussion on the motion to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? That passes unanimously. We are adjourned at 7:45. Thank you, everyone.